Okay, so up till now we've seen that for the most part, the three different loop structures that we've looked at, the for loop, the while loop, and the do while loop, all do pretty much the same thing. But there's one little exception. So let's take a look here. I've got the structure of a while loop and a do while loop here on the screen. And what we're going to take a look at is the order in which our four components happen in each of these loops. If we take a look at the while loop first, you'll see the first thing that happens in the while loop is our initialization. That's then followed by our termination, where we check if our counter is less than a particular value. Then we have our action, where we actually carry out something, the piece of code that we want to repeat. And then we have our progression, so how we get from our initialization to our termination. The do while loop, on the other hand, again starts with the initialization. Then we do the action, followed by the progression. And the very last thing the do while loop does is check to see if our counter meets the condition that it needs to meet. So our termination is the last thing that we do in a do while loop. And that's actually quite a significant thing. So we're going to go back and take a look at the code we wrote earlier to print all of the numbers from 1 to 100 using a for loop, a while loop, and a do while loop, and see what difference does this actually make. Okay, so here we have our repetition1.java example that we did earlier, where our for loop prints all of the numbers from 1 to 100, our while loop prints the numbers from 1 to 100, and our do while loop prints the numbers from 1 to 100. So if we take a look at the for loop first, if we first initialize our counter to 1, then we check if that counter meets this condition. So is I less than 101? If it is, we print system.out to print I. And then we increase the value of I, we check the termination condition, and we do our action. And this goes over and over and over again. So supposing we initialized I to 101. What's going to happen here? Let's compile this and run it. So when we scroll up now, we can see we have our 1 to 100 for our do while loop, and our 1 to 100 for our while loop, but our for loop here hasn't printed any numbers. And that's because our counter never met the condition. It was never less than 101. Let's take a look at the same example with the while loop. Here we have int I equals 1, then we check if it's less than or equal to 100. We do our action and we increase the value of I. We go back and we check it, we do our action and we increase the value of I. So supposing now we initialize I to be 101. Let's compile that and see what effect does it have on our program. So there we have our numbers 1 to 100 printed by our do while loop. And here you'll see now the while loop is not printing anything either. And again, that's because our termination condition was never met. I was never less than or equal to 100. Finally, if we take a look at the do while loop, again you'll see we have our initialization, we have our action, we increase our value of j, we check if it's less than or equal to 100 for our termination condition. We go back and we print and we increase and we check and we print and increase and check. And so the same thing happens again. Let's set j to be 101 to start. If we compile this and we run it, you'll see our for loop prints nothing, our while loop prints nothing, but our do while loop prints the value of I once. And the reason for that is this. When we initialize to 101, the do while loop says do the action. So we print j. Then we increase j to be 102, and only then, after we've printed it once and we've increased the value, only then do we check if it meets the condition of being less than or equal to 100. Okay, so the order in which our components appear in a do while loop is slightly different. And what that means is that a do while loop will always run once, because it's always going to do the action before it checks the termination condition. And that can be really beneficial at times. You might find yourselves in a situation in a program where you need something to run once regardless of a condition, and then to check the condition afterwards. So it will come in handy. Aside from that, the loop does pretty much what all other loops do. Okay, and the three are pretty much interchangeable, but there will be times when the do while loop is more beneficial than the others, or suits a problem a little more than the others. So similarly, you'll find that with for loops and while loops, you'll dip in and out of the one that you think best suits the problem that you're working on. So those are our three structures and the small difference that occurs between them. Next, we're going to take a look at nested loops and what happens when we put one loop inside of another.